Hi, this is Bernard Nomberg with the Nomberg Law Firm. I'm with a neighbor and friend of mine, Krissy Custis, who is an experienced nurse here in the community. And the purpose of us talking today is about workplace violence in a hospital or a medical care facility setting. Krissy, thank you this morning for spending some time with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Where this came about, unfortunately, is recently in our community we had yet another shooting in a hospital setting that led to 2 deaths, one of which was involving a medical care professional, and this unfortunately just happens way too often. So that's why we're talking to you today. Krissy, if you would, just share a little bit of who you are and your experience in the workplace.
Okay. So I am a nurse practitioner. I originally got my bachelor's degree in nursing in 2004, where I immediately started working in the intensive care unit in the Montgomery area. After about a year and a half, I moved to Birmingham, where I started working at the UAB emergency department, where I stayed about 8 years. I think that those numbers are correct. In 2013, I got my nurse practitioner license, and at that time, I went to work at a local hospital for a hospitalist service, where we round on a wide variety of patients, including medical, surgical, ICU, and even psychiatry patients. We have a huge psychiatry population that we round on. And during that time, I also found myself working for transport and on the side of the road with Air-Evac. So I feel like I have a pretty wide knowledge base as far as the different areas of nursing.
So more than a decade now, you've been interacting with patients and dealing with them every day.
Yes, most definitely.
Well, I'd asked you to before we came on today, do a little research, and I think it's some eye-opening statistics and information.
Yes.
But before we get into that, because we're in Alabama, I want to address what requirements, if any, for nurses in the workplace does the state require for nurses to be trained about workplace safety?
There's not any mandated training that we receive for workplace safety. Not in the respect of violence. Now, obviously, we talk about safety as far as taking care of ourselves of, bloodborne pathogens.
Sure.
And, infectious diseases. But as far as how to handle violence and that type of issues, there's not any mandated training.
So is it largely left up to the individual employer how they see fit to train their employees?
It is, and in my experience, I have never received training through a hospital for this type of behavior, and how to handle it and keep myself safe from it.
And just so there's clarification for those of you watching, when we're referring to workplace violence, we're talking about not only interacting with patients or their family members who become violent, but we're also could be talking about third parties who come into the hospital who may not have direct need or dealing with their own family or friends who are patients. But we could also be talking about coworkers as well. So it really is from any source, and we say violence, physical violence, whether it's from just hands or whatever it may be, or a weapon, any type of violence, that's what we're referring to. So the state really doesn't mandate that there be any type of requirements or training. It's up to each individual employer to come up with their own programs to implement that.
Right.
But probably most importantly, and tell me if you think this is sound advice,
Okay.
each individual healthcare provider, a nurse, an LPN, an RN, a CNA, whatever you may be, your designation, you really should take it upon yourself to educate yourself on how to be safe.
Right.
And that's I wanna go over a little bit. I know you did some research that really is eye-opening. The statistics, and at the end what we're going to discuss or go over is how to really take care of yourself, how to educate yourself, how to prevent some of these things. But share with us some of your findings, some of the research that you've done.
Okay. And I do want to go back and just mention the hospitals do, and most hospitals do have a drill. You know, a lot of times you see the active shooter drills that they do in schools. They do the same thing in hospitals, but outside of that, we don't really get a classroom setting of training. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that part of it.
Let me ask you real quick before we get into the stats. Is your experience, do most hospital settings have either metal detectors or safety personnel or security guards in place, or do you not see that?
Some of your urban facilities will have metal detectors and, you know, a security presence or police presence at the emergency room entrance. That is just, you know, patients or family members coming in to the emergency department directly. There's no control into the regular part of the hospital. So the rest of the hospital is open.
I've been in many of the hospitals in the area, and outside of the emergency room, I never see any personnel. I never see any security or safety, and that's not a criticism. It's just an observation.
It's an observation, yes. And then to, you know, take that a step further, because we're talking about the urban facility. When you get out into the rural hospitals, there are none.
None at all.
None at all. No metal detectors, no security presence. So those facilities are open 24 hours a day to whatever may or may not come in. And the only source of protection that they have is like anybody else to call 911.
Wow. All right, let's tell us some of your findings, some of the research that you've done.
So first of all, I just want to mention that, you know, as nurses, we have to maintain our continuing education, and so the majority of this information I've gathered through some of the continuing education that I've done, and it all came from an organization called CEU FAST. So that is where the majority of this information is coming from. They cite the World Health Organization, the U.S. Department of Labor, and the ANA. So that is where the majority of this information comes from. But just a couple of things that I found was very interesting is that the financial cost of workplace violence in 2013 was over $120 billion a year.
Wow.
To me, I never would have thought that number would be that high. And then in 2014, the U.S. Department of Labor showed that there were 3 private sectors that had a greater than 100,000 day away from work. So 3 different areas that had greater than 100,000 days away from work related to violence and injury, and that was the healthcare and social assistance was number 1. And if I remember right, their numbers were like 160-something thousand. Manufacturing came in second, and then retail trade.
So healthcare and social assistants, such as nurses, doctors, etc., they had the highest number of days away from or missing work due to workplace violence.
Yes.
Wow, that's pretty astonishing.
It is. In 2013, the U.S. Bureau of Labor reported that there were greater than 23,000 injuries related to assault. That's a physical assault, and 70% of that 23,000 were healthcare and social workers.
Did your research show, does the data show that that's an underreported amount, or is that pretty accurate, or what leads into the topic that really to address is nurses are on the front line, so to speak, my term, but do they all report what happens in the workplace?
No. And that, you know, I've thought about this a lot myself, and in the, how many years have I been a nurse? 2000, well over a decade.
Yeah.
I think about all the times that I was assaulted, and you don't really think about it as assault because you consider it to be part of your job. You know.
What are some of those examples that you're thinking of assaults?
Well, you have the little old lady who comes in, who may have a urinary tract infection, and she's completely confused. She has no idea where she's at, and she just feels like she's protecting herself. She thinks that we're hurting her, and so she hits us, or she may bite. They may spit to try to get you away from them, and it's not necessarily what she feels. It's not necessarily intentional, but it's still considered violence.
Sure.
And it's an assault towards us that could potentially harm us and take us out of work. Some other examples would be, especially working in the emergency department, we see a lot of trauma patients, alcohol, drug related, so they come in intoxicated or on some form of drug. And with drugs today, a lot of times we don't even know what drug they're coming in on or what effects that they may have because of it. So these patients come in, they're belligerent, they cuss, they hit, they fight, sometimes requiring a slew of personnel to control them in a way so that they don't hurt themselves or hurt one of us. So that's two of the big ones that I kind of see right now. And then of course you just have the mentally ill.
Sure.
And those that are, suffer from bipolar or schizophrenia, and they've been off of their medications and they come in and they become violent. Those are all kind of medically related or substance abuse related. But some other interesting things that I kind of found, and I've experienced myself, is just the environment. Emergency rooms are becoming overrun with patients these days, and so you may see wait times up to 8 hours. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding of prioritizing which patients are seen first.
Right.
And so people get mad
Emotions
if they
run high.
Right. They think that they're sick, but they see other people going back before them, and so it can create some anger, and sometimes it's very difficult to de-escalate that because they don't understand. So that's just a few things.
So with the mentality of a nurse whose job is to help, is to provide medical care, is to do those things to help out the patient, what I'm hearing from you is that a nurse, the typical mentality is these assaults that you're referring to a lot of times are just part of the hazards of the job. So why do I need to report it? I'm not injured per se. I can still work, and maybe only if the injury is bad enough do they feel, well, I got to miss work because I'm dealing now with a broken arm, so now I need to report it. So I can see the thought process and the mentality of that, but it goes back to all of those over 160,000 missed days per year in your profession.
Right. And the interesting thing is we talk about, as a nurse, we feel that this is part of our job. The statistics actually show that underreporting can be as high as 16% amongst nurses alone. So the numbers that you're seeing in the data is actually underreported. So the numbers are actually much higher than what they're being reported as.
I suspect doing the type of work that I've done for 20 odd years, helping nurses and others injured in the workplace, there's probably that mentality that's also, I don't want to report it because I don't want to miss work. I don't want to ruffle feathers. I just want to go back and do my job and helping out those who I've been trained to do so. When in fact, the reality is all of those types of assaults, all of those types of instances need to be reported up through the chain of command within the employment setting.
They do. And I also want to kind of point out the fact that since nurses do feel that this is a part of their job, you have kind of like two generations of nurses. So you have your older generation of nurses that through the years have kind of come up and they don't want to lose work, or they've seen that there's not really been anything done to prevent or to train. There's not really been that process in place, so they continue to not report it.
Sure.
And then you have your newer generation of nurses who, even in the setting where it's very prevalent and should be approached, they aren't reporting it because they're not taught to report it. So at some point, I do believe that we as nurses need to stand up for ourselves and say, we need more regulation on this, and we need a way to report this and monitor it accurately.
Well, let's move on to the last part of what we're talking about here. And you bring up a great point, that if the employer doesn't provide the training that the individual nurse or healthcare provider feels is adequate, that person needs to take it upon themselves to train themselves and to educate themselves.
Right.
So let's talk about some of those things. I know that real world experiences have taught you, and you've done some research. Let's talk about some things that nurses and healthcare providers can do to help themselves in the workplace.
Okay. So just a couple of things that I've kind of picked up from my personal experience, and this kind of goes back to my mom, who is a nurse, and she has always told me the story when she was doing her psych rotations as a student, that she had a little old lady in the psychiatric department hit her over the head with an umbrella. And she said she learned very quickly not to allow the patient to get between her and the door. Sounds very silly, but I find myself even today making sure that there's nothing between me and the door whenever I walk into a room, especially if I'm rounding in the psychiatric department. You know, as silly as it is, it's just the truth. One of the other things that I always do is, if I know that I'm walking into a situation that may become violent or I'm unsure of, I'll ask another employee to go with me. You know, hey, can you go with me? I'm not real sure how this is going to go. And if I don't want to be too overbearing, then I may have that person just stand right outside the room where they're within ear's reach if I do need help. So that's always something to remember, is just, one, don't put yourself in a position, and two, if you're really worried, then have a second person on hand. A couple other things that I did find as I was going through this is that there are different verbal de-escalation things that you can do. So, you know, respect their personal space. Don't be provocative. So keep your hands to yourself. You know, don't try to, you know, come at them in any way. Verbal contact, using very simple language. A lot of times as medical professionals, we like to speak in medical terms, and those things confuse people and can sometimes make things harder. So speaking as simple as you can. Listen. You know, a lot of people forget to just listen. Listen to what they're saying. Repeat what you've heard so that they know that you understand what they've said. Sometimes agreeing to disagree. So those are a few of the verbal de-escalation techniques. And then a couple of things that I found, and I have actually seen this in experience, are things to just not do. Just don't do them. Is don't argue with them. Don't be condescending. Don't command them, so don't tell them what to do. Don't criticize, interrupt, or respond defensively. And I know that a lot of times as nurses, especially in the emergency department, we're very quick to say, well, if you continue to do this, we're going to call security. But threatening to call security can actually be an invitation to aggression. So those are just a few things that I've kind of picked up over my years of experience and through a little bit of research that I've done.
It sounds like an experienced nurse listens and appreciates that something is escalating from an aggravated situation, whether it's a patient you're dealing with, a family member who feels like their loved one is not being cared for. But I know in those situations you can hopefully recognize and know how to deal with it. What you can't deal with, or what you can't prepare for necessarily, is when someone comes in from outside the hospital setting like that shooting that occurred. Hopefully the hospital or the employment situation has gone through a protocol to be able to protect their personnel and
Yes,
others
and I
who
think
are
that
there.
in light of the recent increased number of school shootings and hospital shootings, that hospitals are being a little bit more proactive in training for those types of situations, which is reassuring.
Sure, sure. Well, Krissy, I know this is not the exhaustive list. That there are many, many other things that can be done to help prevent injury, violence, and violence in the workplace for nurses and other healthcare professionals. Where can folks go? Where can they go on the internet to read? Where can they educate themselves if they can't get it from other parties?
The ANA actually has a fair amount of information.
That's the American Nursing Association.
Yes,
Their
yes.
their website. Okay.
Their website. Really, I've just done a search on nursing and workplace violence, and there's been a slew of information that's popped up. A couple of the different websites that I actually have pulled up on my iPad here are like I said, the ANA. I've got OSHA. Actually had a fair amount of information, and there was a recent article on Health US News.
I'm sure that a quick search for nurses, you could probably find continuing education seminars that are geared specifically on this topic.
Yes.
You could probably find other in your local community classes about self-defense, how to de-escalate a situation, and doesn't necessarily have to be in a nursing or a healthcare profession. There's tons of self-defense companies, courses, and folks who are educated to be able to teach those types of things. Krissy, this is just such valuable information. I appreciate you spending your time and giving us your expertise today. Guys, as you know, I'm Bernard Nomberg with the Nomberg Law Firm here in Birmingham. David and I have represented and been, it's been our honor to represent nurses and other healthcare professionals who've been hurt in the workplace, typically workers' compensation type claims. Sometimes, unfortunately, the injuries are so severe that it also leads to a Social Security disability claim. If you have questions about anything that we've talked about today, just shoot me a question, send me an email. Our website is nomberglaw.com. As you know, we have a YouTube channel, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter and the like. And thank you again, Krissy, for sharing this with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, guys.